hope everybody did get some rest last night. We are going to have a full agenda kind of today. We're going to have a presentation, then we're going to go into final action, and then we're going to do some announcements at the end. So first, I would love to welcome Misha Martin to committee. No, wait, back up. Hold that thought. I passed out a child welfare and foster care motions template. So I asked Jesse to put this together, especially for the new people to the legislature. And this is kind of like a unofficial, official agreement of how we do motions or how we should be doing motions. And so I'm a rule follower. I like rules. They gives us nice boundaries. So does anybody have any questions on that template right now? We'll go a little bit more into that when we actually work and do final action on the thing. No questions? Yes. Okay, so now Misha Martin, welcome to committee. She's with Casey family. We heard from her last week, I believe it was, on 2 weeks. Oh my goodness, it's been a fast 2 weeks, or a really long 1 week, I'm not sure, but she was on WebEx, and we get the privilege of having her in person today. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and just get right into your topic. Make sure the blue light's on, I believe, or is it red?
Okay, here we go. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So excited to be here. I'm Misha Martin with Casey Family Programs. I'm a senior director and a strategic consultant. I mainly work in Kansas, New Jersey, and Louisiana, but I also do some special projects with the public policy team. I am from Arkansas, and as I told you last time, I spent almost 16 years at the Department of Human Services in Arkansas working in child welfare as well as some other areas. I'm happy to be here today. We are going to be talking about behavioral health and the intersection with child welfare, and really specifically talking about youth that have complex behavioral health needs. And before I really jump into the PowerPoint, oh, thank you so much, Mr. Anthony. I can see now the PowerPoint. Before I really jump in, I want to talk about a little bit of work that Casey has been doing over the last year, but really the last couple of years. And in the fall of 2024, our research team, our knowledge management team, put out a brief, and you'll see the link to that in my presentation around behavioral health and cross-systems work. And the bulk of my presentation today will be based off of that report that you'll have access to. Casey went and interviewed leaders across the nation. We talked to individuals with lived experience and put together 8 considerations for how to really look at a system in a holistic way to serve youth with those complex needs. Because what we hear across the nation, and last year, I was on a team that hosted several states, mostly southern and Midwestern states. Kansas was a part of it, to come together and talk about. We had our first convening with child welfare leaders, and child welfare leaders across the states pretty much were very consistent in talking about the challenges they were facing with youth sleeping in hospitals, going to emergency room departments, having significant challenges, whether around behavioral health, juvenile justice, or other, and we're struggling on placement and treatment, which we'll talk about in just a second. And then we hosted a convening where we brought teams together, not just of the child welfare directors, but the states got to bring teams. So it could be Medicaid directors, juvenile justice leaders. Again, Kansas was a part of that, to really brainstorm how do we work across systems. Because what we know in child welfare is child welfare can't serve these kids alone and really are not the behavioral health experts in this space. And systems have to be able to work for the entire child. Like, each system has to own their responsibility to be able to provide a holistic approach to meet children and youth and their needs. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So behavioral health, while this is somewhat the focus of this presentation, we also know that youth, it's more than just behavioral health that our system's involved, but this presentation does somewhat focus on behavioral health. We know that nearly 20% of children and youth ages 3 to 17 in the U.S. have mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral disorders. Over 10% have serious emotional disorders. Suicidal behaviors among high school students increased more than 40% from 2010 to 2019. Rates of emergency room department visits increased by 25% between 2016 and 2018. And in 2020, only 44% of adolescents 12 to 17 had a major depressive episode in the last 12 months received treatment. So, our youth, not just youth that are experiencing child welfare, there are some significant behavioral health challenges. We also know that families should not access the child welfare system or foster care to receive services. Child welfare was designed to serve abused and neglected children, but we heard it from leaders across the nation that many times children are entering foster care to receive the mental health or developmental disability services that they need. And that's not how the system is designed. We can move on. I'm going to talk about those family first prevention services here in a little bit. And I'll tell you, I reread the Kansas prevention plan before this presentation. You all in Kansas are really doing some innovative and good work, not just with your Family First prevention plan, but also in working cross systems. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. So the big question, placement versus treatment. If you get a bunch of leaders together in child welfare, behavioral health, Medicaid, developmental disabilities, juvenile justice, education, it will be a conversation that's very interesting, but when it all boils down to, it's placement versus treatment, right? Like this age-old question of, well, they're in foster care, but they're bouncing around. They can't seem to, get stable. And if you hear from child welfare will say, well, they need mental health services. They've had a lot of trauma. They're having mental health crisis or behavioral health crisis. And so the treatment folks want placement. The placement folks want treatment. So what do we do, right? Is it treatment or is it placement? It's both. It's both. But what it also is, it is, are you designing a cross system that works upstream to hopefully prevent the need for placement outside of family? So we're going to move on. I'm going to come back to that some more here in a second. So I want to share with you a case study from Arkansas that me and the team put together before I left Arkansas. And it's a specific case. This is a real youth. And why you're like, we're Kansas. Why do we care about Arkansas? Well, I presented this case study to our cross-system collaborative. And pretty much unanimously, all the states were like, we have youth just like that. This is not an anomaly. We have youth similar to this youth. Now, every youth story may not be this specific story, but this is not the only case in Arkansas like this, and I can almost guarantee you there's some case in Kansas that's similar to this. And the takeaway, what I really want you to take away, because I'm not going to tell this youth's whole story, but we actually came together in a room, and in Arkansas, Human Services is under one giant umbrella. So we had access to child welfare, Medicaid records, early childhood records, juvenile justice records, and developmental disability. So everyone had to come to the table with all their records on this specific child, and we literally put together a process map going back to when the child was born, and we have access to educational records as well. So we wanted to see and we pulled the court records. So we wanted to see everywhere this youth had touched the system and the journey through foster care. And the idea was that if we put together this case, and we did 5, I believe we did 5, that, we would find some places where we could focus on some cross-system collaboration. Because what we were finding was that, well, I'll just say, I was over multiple of these systems, but I spent a lot of time as the child welfare director, and I was like, my peers, they just don't get it. They're constantly like, if you'll just get them, if you'll just place them, if you'll just find that placement, if you'll just get a placement for them. And I'm like, it's way more complex than just finding a placement. And as my peers, well, I think at this point, some of them work for me, but they had this aha moment of, oh my goodness, it's really complex. So let me walk you through this. So notice, birth to 5, no records. That includes no Medicaid encounters. Goes to school, education system, starts getting some occupational physical speech. Actually did not come into the system, the child welfare system, through the child abuse hotline. There was a court case filed by the school in Arkansas, what's called a FINS case, because the kid was not going to school. And so through that, then the child enters foster care. I'm keeping it very simple because the point of this is not this whole child's story, but how complex it can be. So child then hits the juvenile system. Now, even though it looks like a timeline, we kind of put things together. So, by the way, while this kid was a kid and in foster care, had 5 delinquency cases, had the foster care case the whole time, is removed because of substance abuse incarceration. Rights are terminated about 2012. Look at the placements. 3 foster homes, 4 therapeutic foster homes, 4 placements in QRTP, 2 emergency shelters, a child welfare developmental disability placement. And that does not include the residential, which go to the next one. So you get behavioral health, 32 residential placements of acute PRTF, state hospital. I mean, this is one of those kids with chronic. I know you're looking shocked, but hopefully you don't have a single kid in Kansas like this. But I will just tell you that the other state directors that we work with were not totally shocked by this. Juvenile justice, 6 stays in juvenile justice detention centers, and Arkansas has had juvenile justice reform. And then get all the way to 2017, if y'all can see this. Finally, the child gets, or youth at this point, gets a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, gets in a developmental disability foster home, which, by the way, there was multiple. It didn't go super well. But then, if you're expert in developmental disabilities, he actually becomes eligible for the waiver. And if you're super familiar, it's not likely that he developed a developmental disability. So he has touched all these systems, and then he goes to kinship placement. Now, we had been doing huge efforts to do more kinship placement, but this was also a situation where the kinship was labeled as abandoned, but when we really dug in years later and did all this trauma and harm to this child, it wasn't that he didn't have family, even though that was in all the records. He doesn't have family. It was that his family had been begging for help around, hey, we'll take him, but we need supports and services. We need, more than just weekly counseling. We need more than just, what, and honestly, he didn't have a proper diagnosis. So again, I don't want y'all to think this is about Arkansas. What I want you to think about is maybe you don't have a kid just like this in Kansas, but we see youth across the nation with complex needs who are hitting multiple different systems. And so systems have to be created to serve the youth and working together, and there has to be cross-system collaboration. Now, I will move on from this and start talking about the 8 considerations. Can we go to the next slide? I can touch it if you want. Thank you. We can go to the next one. So again, this is from the report that you'll see the link on in this presentation, but you can also get to it on our KC Family website. Creating healing pathways for children with behavioral health needs. And so we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. So actively engaging with children and families. This goes back to a comment. Yeah, if you'll move it off. This goes back to the comment that I made about the relative. I think we think that we actively engage with children and families. But again, across states that I work in, it's common that there's a abandonment criteria. Maybe it's adoptive parents. They say, oh, those adoptive parents, they abandon the kids. Or, they're in a PRTF, psychiatric residential treatment facility, and parents won't go pick them up. And so they label them as abandonment. I will tell you, over the years, I had kid after kid that my team would come to me and say, in fact, we went through whole phases of, justify your high-end placement. Give me a write-up on what's going on. And I would get pages of how terrible behaviors were of kids, or their long history of mental health, or, or they have no family. But when we really dug into those kids in those situations, it wasn't that they were bad kids or bad behaviors. It was that they needed somebody to be heard, to be listened to. And so whether that was actually listening to the kids and understanding where they currently are, or if it's listening to the family. I'll never forget calling a grandmother myself. I was director of Children and Family Services, and we had one of our most complex kids at the time. Had a history similar to the one I just showed you. And I had been working that case, and they kept telling me, they have no family, they have no family. And I'm like, who has no family? Like, nobody, like y'all. And so I start looking at our fax system, what we don't call it fax, and there was a grandmother. So we're in the middle of a big conference room, and I just pick up the phone and call Grandma. And y'all, Grandma was a retired special ed teacher. But what she said was, I'm going to call her Kay. I can't care for Kay. I just can't care for her. And so that had led staff to say she has no family, but engaging with grandmother, she wasn't saying, I don't care about Kay. In fact, I talked to her for a long time. She wasn't saying, I don't care about Kay or I don't want Kay. What she was really saying was, I just don't have the supports that I need to in my home. And we really fleshed that out. I'm giving you a very short story about Kay. But I don't have the supports that I need to be able to care for Kay. But it was very clear to me after one phone call, she loved and was committed, but she needed the mental health services and supports to be able to care for Kay in her home. So I think this is where it really goes to with engagement. And so often we tag parents as abandoned, whether that's adoptive or biological, when really what they're seeking is additional supports and services to be able to care for their youth, maybe with complex needs. Okay, so also when you're talking about cross-system collaboration among Medicaid, behavioral health, child welfare, a lot of times the data is not across systems. So really making sure that you know who these youth are, not just the youth in child welfare, but who are the youth that have complex needs in Medicaid and are cross systems, really able to talk across systems and then pull data. And I'll tell you again, in working with state leaders from across states, one of their biggest barriers that they identified is confidentiality and legal barriers. I can't speak to whether that specifically is an issue in Kansas, but I am speaking that across the states that we work in, that is their lead barrier is legal issues related to confidentiality of data sharing across different state agencies. So this is the PowerPoint I want to spend a little bit of time on, but I want to be respectful of you all's time. This real cross-system coordination. And so using multiple streaming funds, having multiple agencies working together, I think you all in Kansas are very fortunate that there's clearly been some cross-system collaboration happening, especially among child welfare, Children and Family Services, DCF, and KDAD, I believe that's your acronym. And I saw that when I started asking questions, both I mentioned earlier, the Family First Prevention Plan. While it shouldn't be child welfare's main responsibility to provide mental health services, they partner with the behavioral health agency. It's clear that there's been some partnerships where you're using Family First or child welfare federal funding to fund some innovative and evidence-based services. And so your own DCF's prevention plan mentioned that you had some major juvenile justice reform, SB 367. And in that juvenile justice reform, you saw some very positive things of reduction in juveniles in juvenile detention, but that also caused some increase in DCF, in Children and Family Services. So then that leads to question like, is is it the right kids? Are the right kids being served by juvenile justice? Are the right kids being served by children and family? I can't answer that question for you, but I can say DCFS had a very appropriate response in that they listened to the stakeholders and invested in services that were targeted towards older youth. And so you have 3 behavioral health interventions that are all evidence-based that are being funded through DCF: functional family therapy, parent-child interaction therapy, multiple systemic therapy, I said 3, I should have said 4, and family-centered treatment. All evidence-based services really targeted at that older population. I haven't seen evaluations on those, but Arkansas has a couple of those, and we've seen great outcomes. I suspect you all have as well. And then also wanted to highlight the New Jersey model. In New Jersey has definitely a clear behavioral health, child welfare, partnership, cross-system collaboration, and frankly, somewhat similar to what has been happening lately since 2021 in Kansas. But I chose to feature New Jersey because New Jersey's cross-system approach to child welfare and behavioral health started in 2004. So it's had 20 years of implementation, and the data on it is very good. So with New Jersey, a few key points. They implemented a mobile response and stabilization service. It's a single point of entry for kids who need behavioral health assistance. It's available 24/7, and it has an in-person response time of 1 hour. I read up on your Kansas mobile response, but you just launched in 2021. So it seems like it's in line with the national model of something that could be very effective. But I suspect y'all are like other rural states, and when you roll out a service, it's hard to have workforce and providers. And, I'm not in on the specifics, but the model of a mobile response that you all rolled out in 2021 is similar to New Jersey and should have a major impact. It may take time, or you may be seeing it now. Again, I couldn't find an evaluation on that, but I did want to highlight that. And there is a link to the New Jersey report in this presentation. Oh, and one other thing I want to say about New Jersey, 94%. So again, this is not just child welfare kids. This is a single point of entry for behavioral health services for families that are in crisis, or maybe not total like crisis, but they're in enough crisis that they're calling this hotline saying, I need help. 94% of the kids that received those services were maintained in their home. That's a pretty good outcome. And I am working in New Jersey, and so I've been studying up on their data. They have a lot of data around their children's systems of care. It's on their website. It's a really great model. And then I'll just mention on services. So I've kind of talked about the mobile response, but I did also want to mention the peer support. There is some of that happening in Kansas because I've met a couple of your peer support people, but that is the idea that families or parents can have that peer support, other parents who have gone through similar things, whether that's in the child welfare space or the behavioral health space. There's definitely data, research that shows that that's a very positive service to have. And then these others, these are 8 recommendations of what it looks like for a cross system to really be able to address youth with significant behavioral health challenges, obviously workforce, both for child welfare as well as behavioral health. Strengthening community pathways. We've talked about this a little bit with mobile response, but this is broader around just home and community-based services as well as resource centers so that families can get what they need without having to access the more high-end services. I will tell you in several states that I work in, it really is on the Medicaid spectrum. Oh, and one point that I should have made about Kansas mobile response, you're also funding it through Medicaid, which is really innovative and like there's not a lot of states that have figured that out. So you guys are really doing a good job when it comes to that. So home and community based in a lot of states, it's like once a week therapy, and it might take 2 months to get into once a week therapy, or something high end like residential placement. So creating a behavioral health system or developmental disability system that has those home and community based services is really important to keep kids out of foster care. And then increasing access to effective legal advocacy. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. And then last, prioritizing kinship care. Again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that because I talked about that at length the last time I was here. But I will just comment that this prioritizing kinship care also goes to a bigger issue when it comes to a lot of states are questioning, do we increase residential, do we not? Do we have enough beds, do we not? And so really making sure that the kids that you do have are in the right level of care. So do you have kids in your high-end beds that really should be at home with relatives with intensive supports? You can't just send them home to relatives. You got to figure out, not you in particular, but the system has to figure out, do you have the home and community-based services to support them? Are they going to be able to sustain in school? Because it's really hard for a relative to take in a complex kid if they can't maintain in school, right? They're going to work. So this idea of, have you really looked at your system to identify, are the right kids filling up your bed? And I can't answer that for you because I haven't dug in, but I can just tell you, not only in Arkansas, but in several other states that I've worked, I did some pretty intense consulting with Texas around their kids sleeping in the offices last year. And we really did, I mean, I can't take total credit for the work, but one of the things that we came in and said was like, are you sure that the right kids are in your high-end bed? And like, let's go through some exercises to figure that out. And what they found was they did need to move kids to the right level of care. They did need to think more creatively about placing kids with relatives. And they went from hundreds of kids in offices, and they were down to into single digits at one point for the whole state of Texas. So really digging in and figuring out, are your beds full of kids that don't need to be there? Again, I can't answer that for you. Those are just some tips on what really you need to ask before you start talking about, are we ready to increase high-end residential placements? And thank you for your time, and I'll take questions if the chair would like me to.
Thank you, Misha. Yes, questions on the presentation? Okay, Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here in person. We appreciate that. I'm interested in, when you talked about data, it's something in Kansas that we had put money in our general fund for actually years, and we haven't come up yet with a system that can work across agencies, but not even just that, just an updated system for our Department of Children and Families. And I'm curious if other states how they've solved that, if, where they're at with that. I mean, to us, it seems like it's going at a snail's pace. And there might be some things that are off the shelf that could work rather than just super, something that is, I mean, I don't know. I know in our Commerce Department, we talked about, are there things we can just get off the shelf that would work? And I don't know, it's been frustrating for us to see the delay in that data piece. So what's your thoughts about that?
Sure. I actually have a lot of experience in that, and share your frustrations about it being complicated, but I'll tell you, it's complicated. And this is from the girl who is like, oh, we can conquer anything. So, and when I say that is, in Arkansas, we went through 2 procurement processes. We put out a RFP, had a vendor write it. I was intimately involved in that. Got through the RFP process to negotiations. I was director at that point. At that time, using our state's rules for procurement, we selected the vendor that scored the best, and we started negotiations. It was very obvious to me that they were not going to be able to finish the project, so we had to cancel the RFP. So then we did it a second time, made some modifications, awarded a contract. We required demonstrations from every single one of the vendors so that we could actually see a product, because I said, how hard could this be, right? We'll get something out of the box. That project in the last couple of months, they have actually, after 2-3 years after I left, the project has ceased, and they are going to have to do it a third time. But if you're thinking Arkansas is so incompetent, I could also give you a list of multiple other states who have procured for new CWIS systems and have had failed projects. So I use Arkansas because I don't feel bad being critical about myself. But if you want to see me afterwards, I'll also share with you several other states who I know had competent leaders. And the thing is, I had one IT person say to me, maybe you don't want to be the first. And I was like, I like being the first. But the CWIS model is still a relatively new. There are some states that have integrated different models. But to me, based on my research, I have not seen a fully off-the-shelf CWIS product that is 100% ready to go. So I'd almost say to you, maybe being slow and being careful and thorough might be better than moving quickly.
We're not moving quickly, anyway. But what states have done it well? I mean, are there some states that are integrated, I mean, that it's going well, even if it was not off the shelf? I mean, who's doing this right?
If there was someone else at this podium, they might tell you a couple of states that they think are doing it well. I'm not sure I'm in agreement with that, so I actually don't feel comfortable to say that we as part of our CWIS, we ask people like Casey, link us up with everybody, and there's actually host calls with the states that are doing CWIS. I'm not comfortable telling you I have seen a state that I think it's going, has implemented, it's going super great.
This is not encouraging.
I'm sorry. I'm just transparent.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, that helps us understand, maybe be a little more understanding with the folks here when I hear that from you. So thank you.
That is encouraging, sort of. Yes. Perspective is very valuable, so I appreciate that. Representative Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Misha, for your presentation. And I think I can safely speak for all of my colleagues. We would have never guessed that you were from Arkansas. We were probably thinking
because I don't
New
have
York
an accent.
Or something. Not at all. Not at all. Yeah, not one that we ever noticed. Anyway, my question is with respect to you mentioned that Texas had made some headway, if not conquered the children sleeping in the office. Can you walk us through how did that did they come up with like some sort of placement for them? How they work that out? Because that's an issue that we've got here.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they conquered it. Now, in a great, they put together a plan. It's like 15 or 20 bullet plan. It's actually included in the report that is in the link in my presentation. I'll make sure to get it to you, Representative Carr, because it's a whole comprehensive plan. But I'll tell you, I think they wouldn't mind me sharing. They did initially do what the gut reaction is, which is like just put them in what did they call it? I want to make sure I use the right term. Just another residential placement. They created a temporary, unlicensed residential placement, and they saw what would be expected is lots of problems. Kids would go there. They weren't necessary. If they were in school, then they'd have to move school. Like shelter, it's basically an unlicensed shelter. It didn't fix their problem, right? Like it felt like it could be a fix. So then they started working to move those kids. So it was a combination. There's literally 20 bullets of the plan on staffing individual cases, and I was a part of those, really digging in and asking questions. Who are the relatives? What supports do we need? There were licensing challenges. So sometimes you'll see, hey, there's a relative, but we can't get around the licensing challenge. So they had daily placement calls, including central office, but they also had systems work that they had to do around licensing barriers. They did provider efforts, so working with their providers on would they take the kids, but then they had to work on, do we have the right kids in the right placement? It's very complicated, but and I don't have the report right in front of me, but relatives were a huge part of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Representative Page?
Thank you. I respect your presentation, and I think you've been honest with us. And my issue is always finance, and I know people think I'm crazy for asking that, but you got to be able to pay for it. And with all the cuts and things that are coming down, how are you guys working with that?
Well, I'm no longer in Arkansas. I'm at KC Family Programs, but I will say that it appears that Kansas has done some investment in mental health services. It seems like reading the prevention plan, the secretary has invested, I'm sure with the support of you all, in evidence-based services that are mental health and behavioral health focused. There was an additional service that I'm not sure how it's funded that the department mentioned to me and asked, the MHIT program that's working mental health teams with education. So it seems that Kansas is getting using multiple different funding streams, not just through child welfare, but using Medicaid to do mobile crisis. But again, I think the department would probably be a better entity to answer. But from an outsider looking in, it does seem like they're getting creative on using multiple funding sources.
Thank you.
Committee, other questions? Representative Owsley?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Misha, for being here. To kind of piggyback off of Representative Humphrey's questions on the CWIS, it's not encouraging, but it's reassuring to know that, we're not alone in the struggle for this, because we've been discussing it for years. And on slide 9, this is just a comment, it says comprehensive assessments need to be put in place at the community level. And per some of our conversations the other day discussing our rate of removal done by law enforcement, I wonder if we don't miss that marker right out of the gate. But that's a conversation for another day. You made the comment, the right kids in the high-end beds, and when I was discussing with our DA, who was actually in opposition to our definition of neglect bill that we heard the other day, he made the comment, I don't care about the number of kids coming into care. I care that we're getting the right kids into care, And so I do have a question buried in here. Am I foolish to think that the CWIS, whenever it does come to fruition, will help, connect and get through some of the classified barriers that exist currently today? Because I've thought for a long time that, if we could just share that information readily, not only do I think we need better communications between law enforcement and KDADs or DCF, but then you throw in KDADs and KDHE, and they're all intertwined. And I know there's no silver bullet, but is this just going to help our Department of Children and Families, or is this going to help services outside of their perspective?
So I want to actually make a comment on the first one, which is, are the right kids coming in care? Just to reemphasize a point that I made earlier, are the right kids coming in care related to police protective custody? I think the question probably should be are you ensuring that kids are not coming into care to get services and support? So that really, child welfare should be for children that are in immediate danger, that have suffered abuse or neglect. Kids should not be coming into foster care just because they need behavioral health, developmental disability services. So that community assessment and what that looks like and who does that is really critical. On the second part on CWIS, so from the feds, CWIS does require interfaces with other agencies, but it will depend on what your agency decides or the legislature funds, what interfaces, data interfaces actually happen with other agencies. And I'm sure there'll be discussions around, can those interfaces happen if your laws allow? And I apologize, I could do some research on that, but I'm not an expert on that particular issue in Kansas. But hopefully the idea behind CWIS is that there would be interfaces with other agencies and you would have better data.
Thank you. Other questions? Representative Humphreys?
That's okay. This is a little, just a minor point, but when you were talking about abandonment, several times you mentioned abandonment by the adoptive parents. Is that a problem in Arkansas that you've had?
It's actually across
Disruption?
It's actually actually nationally a problem. So that's not just specific to Arkansas. We're actually better than some of the national average on failures to adopt. But that was a discussion among our child welfare leaders when we brought our states in through that Casey work last week, that they feel like that they are seeing an increase in failed adoptions. Usually that's the term we use, not abandonment. Some systems call them abandonment, but failed adoptions.
Or disrupted is what
Or disrupted,
term
right.
I've heard, but
Yes,
you're seeing an increase in that?
nationally.
And that would be in adoptions through the system, not private adoptions, or,
I would have to do a little research on that. I was speaking through adoptions through the system.
yeah, okay. Okay, that would be interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions, committee? I would say, and I did not prepare her for this, but we are working 2 bills on Wednesday about the definition of neglect and parental rights. So if you have any questions, she is a great resource on that, on those topics, especially and given that national perspective. Does that open up any questions? Okay. Wait, one more. Representative Page.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. How would you define neglect?
Well, I'm going to give you the Casey answer, which there really is. I know I talked about this last time, but there is the analysis of definition of neglect on the Casey website, and I think that towards the end it gives some recommendations. That may not be the word that we use. It might have been considerations, but off the top of my head, I just remember a few of the things like making, like one of the recommendations is around a pattern of neglect versus a single act. And at the moment, I can't think of the others, but I can make sure that you get the end of that report because there are some really good recommendations around neglect.
I believe we have that report in testimony from that day. That was, is that correct, Natalie? Yeah, Natalie, it's posted under Natalie's name, but she did submit that as, I guess, research on the bill.
And I've remembered a couple other things, sorry, which is you really want to make sure that you don't have overly broad terms. And so really when you look at your definition of neglect, does it say like failure to provide support? What does that mean? What does that actually mean? Or another example would be that the likelihood of harm. So like, you don't want it to be so broad that there's always a risk. I mean, if I had a kid right here, there's a risk that, especially a small kid, he could walk through that door and the door would slam on him. Is that failure to supervise? Is that neglect? So that kind of goes back to an overly broad definition, but almost any kid is at some risk of harm. So making sure that your definition is not so broad that anything could be risk of harm.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you. And just your making sure you don't have to come into care to get the services was also part of that bill. And so it says in the back, before entering an order of temporary custody, the judge shall consider any prevention services. So I think we're on the right trail with a couple things. We just need to maybe put a little bit more conversation and debate into it. Thank you, Misha.
We can do that on Wednesday. Yay. Okay, any other questions for Misha? Thank you so much for being in person.
Yes.
I really appreciate it. I'm glad you did not come Wednesday when the snow is hitting, so.
Thank you for having me.
Timing was great, thank you. Okay, committee, next on the agenda is final action on bills previously heard. We're gonna discuss HB 2075. Jesse, do you wanna do an overview of that real quick? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jesse with the Revisor of Statutes Office. So current statute requires a permanency hearing be held within 12 months of the date that a court has authorized a child's removal from the home, and then all subsequent hearings be held within every 12 months thereafter. 12 months, 1 year. So what the bill does is it proposes changing both of those times to 9 months, so that a permanency hearing would be held within 9 months of the date that the court has authorized the child's removal, and then every subsequent hearing also occur within every 9 months thereafter.
Okay, thank you. So committee, what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for discussion. We'll have discussion. This is where you comment on the bill. This is where you say what concerns you, what you like, what you dislike. This is the time to offer any amendments. And we'll do all of that work here, and then we will entertain a motion on what we want to do with that, the final bill. So I'm opening up for discussion. Committee discussion. Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm looking back for the agenda. Can somebody remind me if there were any opponents to this bill?
There were no opponents to this bill.
Thank you.
Representative Barth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure that, because we didn't really talk about the fiscal note on this, but I did want to go back over that and clarify on the statistics too, that it estimates that 50% of children in foster care would have 2 fewer months in out-of-home placement with this bill. And that's still the estimation that we have. I mean, that's a big improvement. The other question I wanted to confirm with is the $7 million looks like we're saving $7 million. Like, that doesn't really happen very much with fiscal notes. So I just wanted to make sure in my shock and awe here that was really going to be a savings. And do we have any way to verify that as well?
Does anyone have any comments? Is DCF, are you the one that provides the fiscal note for that? Would you like to comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. I'm Tanya Keys in the role of Deputy Secretary for the Department for Children and Families. Thank you for the question. The $7 million that is estimated or projected as a possible savings for foster care is all funds, so that includes federal and state. The state general fund possible savings, I believe, is $4.8 million.
And that's simply by reducing the time children are in care. Is that correct?
Yes, for the administrative costs, again, with the assumption that half of children in care may experience 2 fewer months in care. And that's how that calculation was derived.
Go ahead.
Okay, I think I have one more other follow-up question. It's not really a question, it's more just a comment for discussion. Just about longevity of, like, assuming that this passes because we're trying to help kids get permanency in a much shorter time frame. You know, in other committees too, we've heard a lot about just some shortage of judges, and I know this can affect that. We've talked a little bit about committee, you know, just maybe next year or so, once this is implemented, or assuming it would go through, let's say it gets passed, that we have some sort of kind of follow-up to see where we're at, like the challenges, you know, with attorneys and judges sometimes having to cover multiple counties and rural parts of the state, just to see how this actually worked and if there's anything we need to do going forward.
Yes, and we did hear from a judge in Winfield on Friday who testified that it wouldn't have any real change to the court system. So I think those challenges are there. I don't think this will affect the challenges they're already facing. So thank you. The judge in Winfield said basically there wouldn't really be an effect on the court system. It's not an extra burden for them to hear it 3 months earlier. So. And that was in rural Kansas. Representative Burkamp.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So 9 months is the end date. Is there anything in statute that says a parent or guardian would have a right to a sooner court date than that? Like if they petition, or is like it's just up to 9 months? So like if your child goes into care, could you just be potentially stuck 9 months without them, or is there a way to expedite that at all?
You know the answer to that, Jesse?
So it has to be held within 9 months, so it's not an exact 9-month time range. I'm not sure of anything in statute, but I'm sure upon a motion to the court could schedule a hearing sooner than 9 months.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm seeing head nods in the audience from case providers. Okay. Representative Roser, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the questions that I had when we originally heard this was if there was data regarding how many of those court cases were actually not being seen until 9 months or being seen until 12 months. Did we end up getting that data?
I don't know. I don't, our Deputy Secretary Keys. Thank you for your willingness.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. The Department for Children and Families requested that data from the Office of Judicial Administration. I know they were trying to put that together up to now. We're not sure what that data says, but Office of Judicial Administration is aware of the data request.
Okay. I don't really want to delay because that could take a long time.
Yeah, I agree. I just would be more comfortable knowing, if this is going to change the load forward, what that's going to do for the courts, and then I could get better feedback from my county.
And we did reach out to the courts, and again, there was no opponents. And when the judge testified, he had spoken to several of his fellow chief judges, and all of them were in agreement that it would not be an extra burden.
Thank you.
Representative Owsley.
Just along those lines, at the magistrate reception last week or 2 weeks ago, I talked with quite a few of the magistrates that were there that are the sync docket holder in their district, and I discussed not only the 9 months, but potentially a 6-month follow-up, and nobody there they didn't bat an eye at it, no problems.
Okay, and with that is a great introduction. I have an amendment. Jesse's going to pass that out to you. And Natalie, thank you. Jesse, do you want to go over it? Perfect. No hurry, you're good.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jesse with the Reviser of Statutes Office. The amendment before you, if you look on the second page, the substantive change is going to be striking the proposed 9 months to 6 months in regards to the subsequent hearings. So under this amendment, that first permanency hearing would be held within 9 months, and then any hearings after that would be every 6 months. And then page 1 is just a change to the title for Constitution requirements.
There are questions on the amendment? I brought this amendment after the discussion that we had in committee. There were several, I guess, ideas around this, discussion around this thought. It matches the 15 months for the federal timeframe, so 9 and 6. So I think that would be a good change. And as Representative Owsley said, the courts were in support of this. So Representative Roser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since this is comments, I just want to say that I'm a proponent of this. I think that initial 9 months gives us a good opportunity to lay the groundwork, and then the accountability of 6 months thereafter is a completely appropriate amount of time to reconsider, and from personal experience would provide consistency for the child.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Representative Owsley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm not trying to speak for anybody. I just relaying conversations that I'd had when discussing this bill. When we talked about age-appropriate courts, and putting things in child time, that's when I started to get a little bit of pushback. Because that takes more than just a date that's now good for any sync hearing. But this one, like I say, I didn't speak with anybody that had opposition to this.
Thank you. And I thought that timeline is very interesting, and maybe that's something we look at in the future. It's going to take a lot more data and research, but it might be something we consider down the road. Okay, is there a motion on the amendment? Right? Okay. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move that we amend House Bill 2075 by amending on line 4 after such child's home and adding subsequent hearings be held every 6 months thereafter. And on page 2, line 9, after the word, striking the word 9 and adding the word 6.
Okay, any final discussion or questions? Oh, and a second by the Representative Neighbor. Thank you. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Representative Neighbor seconded it, yes. Okay, is there another motion? Any further discussion? Representative Neighbor.
I don't have my mic on. I don't have any amendments or anything, but Madam Chair, I would recommend that we move House Bill, I've lost my mind, 2075 out favorable as amended.
Okay. Okay, Representative Pickard seconded it. Any other questions or discussions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. And we will move this along to the House. Okay, is there anything else that we need to discuss as a committee? I have some announcements really quickly. Wednesday, hopefully, the weather allows us to do this. If not, we will have to meet on Friday. So I'm just giving you that heads up, I know. So hopefully the weather cooperates with us. But on Wednesday, we are going to do final action on HB 2132, the definition of neglect, and HB 2175, the Miranda-style rights for parents. There is a lot for us to consider there. Get your amendments in to Jessie if you want to give her permission to let us know if there's other amendments out there. You can give her that permission, and that way we're not duplicating efforts. And she's not working the same amendment 10 times, because that would be helpful. And then on Monday is our last committee to pass out bills. So we will be hearing HB 2311. We will be going into emergency final action, hopefully, if we vote on that, and getting that out of committee if we so choose, because that is our last day for bills. Monday. Okay, with that, anything else? Okay, we are adjourned.